South African President Cyril Ramaphosa walked into the White House on Wednesday, May 21, 2025. He was there to meet U.S. President Donald Trump. Now, visits to the White House can be pretty standard. Leaders shake hands, smile for cameras, and talk about important global stuff. However, this meeting had a bit of a cloud hanging over it. There was an undercurrent of tension, particularly around one very sensitive issue: the situation of white South Africans, especially farmers. People back in South Africa were reportedly a bit nervous, even a little skeptical about this whole trip, wondering what might unfold. Welcome to Adare, Africa. Thanks for watching President Ramaphosa, known for his calm and measured approach. He was a key negotiator ending apartheid, remember? Likely knew this wouldn't be a simple meet and greet. The American president, on the other hand, isn't exactly famous for avoiding controversial topics. In fact, he often dives right into them. So, when these two leaders sat down, the world watched, wondering if sparks would fly. The public part of the meeting, the bit the cameras usually capture, promised to be interesting to say the least. The primary goal for President Ramaphosa was to mend some fences. Relations between the US and South Africa had become a bit strained. President Trump had previously made some pretty critical comments about South Africa's land reform policies. He also voiced concerns about its foreign policy and made allegations about the mistreatment of the white minority population. These were claims that the South African government strongly denied, so Ramaphosa was in Washington hoping to smooth things over and correct what he saw as mischaracterizations of his country. Beyond clearing the air on these contentious issues, President Ramaphosa also had other objectives. He was looking to negotiate new trade deals. Economic partnerships are always high on the agenda for any head of state visiting another major power. He also hoped to persuade President Trump to attend the upcoming Group of 20 (G20) summit, which was scheduled to be held in South Africa in November 2025. This was significant because the Trump administration had initially indicated it might boycott the summit, so there was a lot riding on this visit for South Africa. As expected, the public portion of the meeting quickly turned to the controversial topic. President Trump didn't waste much time. He confronted President Ramaphosa directly about the allegations of systematic persecution and even murder of white farmers in South Africa. This wasn't just a casual mention, it was a full-on presentation. Trump, it seemed, had come prepared with materials to back up his concerns. The atmosphere, already a bit charged, became visibly more intense as Trump laid out his case in front of the gathered press. To illustrate his points, President Trump presented a video. This video featured Julius Malema, a prominent South African opposition politician. In the footage, Malema was seen chanting a song. This particular song has been highly controversial, with many interpreting its lyrics as a call for violence against white farmers. Trump also showed newspaper clippings, presumably detailing incidents of farm murders. He even played more footage from rallies where the contentious song, often referred to as "Kill the Boer," was sung. It was a multimedia approach to a diplomatic confrontation, designed to be impactful. The claims didn't stop there. President Trump reiterated an even more serious allegation that a white genocide was occurring in South Africa. This term is incredibly loaded and has been a rallying cry for certain groups, but it's also been heavily disputed by many, including the South African government and various fact-checkers. For Trump to bring it up in a direct meeting with the South African president was a significant move, signaling the depth of his concern, or perhaps the narrative he wished to project to his own audience. President Ramaphosa listened to these claims. His spokesperson would later describe this part of the meeting as an orchestrated show for the cameras. The implication was that the real, substantive discussions happened away from the public glare, in a closed-door session. However, in that moment, Ramaphosa had to react to what was being presented. He maintained his composure, aiming to address the points raised by Trump. His task was to counter these powerful images and words with facts and context, a difficult job when faced with such a dramatic presentation. One of the most striking pieces of evidence President Trump presented was an image. He claimed this image showed burial sites of white farmers who had been murdered in South Africa. However, this turned out to be incorrect. The image was actually from a completely different country and a different context. It depicted humanitarian workers lifting body bags in Goma, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC. The photo was taken on February 3, 2025, after battles involving M23 rebels. News agencies like Reuters and AFP quickly pointed out this misidentification. The source of this particular error was traced back. The image had been featured in a blog post by American Thinker, a conservative website. Even American Thinker later acknowledged that President Trump had misidentified the image. It's a stark reminder of how misinformation can spread and be used, even at the highest levels of international diplomacy. For President Ramaphosa, this presented an opportunity to highlight the inaccuracies in the narrative being pushed. It wasn't about denying tragic deaths, but about ensuring the facts were correct, and not sensationalized or misrepresented for political purposes. Another piece of visual material shown by Trump included footage of rows of crosses. These were also claimed to be burial sites for murdered white farmers. BBC Verify, a fact-checking unit, looked into this. They geolocated the crosses to KwaZulu-Natal province in South Africa, near a town called Newcastle. It turned out these crosses were part of a temporary memorial for a specific murdered white farming couple, Glenn and Vita Rafferty. Google Street View imagery from May 2023 confirmed that the crosses were no longer standing at that location, indicating it wasn't a permanent, ever-growing graveyard as perhaps implied. Regarding the controversial song Kill the Boer, President Ramaphosa provided context. He emphasized that the Economic Freedom Fighters, EFF, the party led by Julius Malema, who was shown singing the song, is a minority party. In the previous year's election, the EFF secured about 9.5% of the vote. Ramaphosa also stated that the South African government itself opposes the sentiments expressed in that song. It's also worth noting that South African courts have previously ruled that singing the song can be legally permissible, interpreting it as making a political point rather than a direct incitement to violence. A complex legal distinction for sure. Despite the very public and somewhat awkward confrontation, President Ramaphosa later described the meeting as a great success. This might sound surprising, but diplomacy often has multiple layers. The public spectacle might be one thing, while the private discussions can be entirely different. Ramaphosa's team suggested the real business was conducted behind closed doors. His main aim was to correct what South Africa viewed as serious mischaracterizations being promoted by some in the US, and to get the relationship back on a more stable footing. The South African government has consistently denied claims of a white genocide, while acknowledging that South Africa has a tragically high murder rate overall, with 26,232 murders reported last year. They point out that farm attacks, while horrific, are part of this broader crime problem, and not indicative of a targeted genocide. Of those total murders, 44 occurred within the farming community, which included 8 farmers. Statistics from the Transvaal Agricultural Union, TAU, for 2024, reported 23 white and 9 black people killed in farm attacks. A South African judge in February 2025 even dismissed the idea of a genocide as clearly imagined and not real. President Ramaphosa was also in Washington to push for tangible outcomes. He believed he had made headway in persuading President Trump to attend the G20 summit in South Africa. This would be a diplomatic win, signaling a re-engagement from the US. Furthermore, discussions were initiated on several areas of trade and cooperation. In a traditional diplomatic gesture, the two leaders also exchanged gifts. Each gave the other a book. These small acts are part of the complex dance of international relations, even when disagreements are profound. Ultimately, the meeting highlighted the starkly different perspectives on a sensitive issue. For Trump, it was an opportunity to voice concerns amplified by certain media outlets and political groups. For Ramaphosa, it was a crucial chance to present South Africa's side of the story directly, to counter misinformation, and to salvage a vital international relationship. The visit underscored the challenges of navigating global politics in an era of rapid information and misinformation spread, and the delicate balance between public posturing and private diplomatic engagement.